The Chamber of Adjudication on Station Perimeter Zero had not convened a war crimes tribunal in 140 years. The last species to stand accused there was the Vekmiri Compact, tried for using cascade plagues against a rival's food supply. They lost. They no longer existed as a spacefaring civilization. Now the seats were full again, and the accused was Earth. Ambassador Naila Chowdhury walked into the chamber, flanked by 2 aides and absolutely nothing else. No weapons, no security detail, no dramatic entrance. She wore a plain grey suit. She carried a single black case. The gallery, packed with representatives from 41 member species of the Galactic Concord, watched her the way you watch an animal you've been told is dangerous, but have never actually seen attack anyone. Justice Threl Vantu presiding was a Corveth, a species whose culture had not fought a real war in over 3,000 years, having long ago outsourced conflict resolution to the Concord's legal apparatus. His people found violence so alien that they genuinely could not conceive of doing it themselves. They tried other species instead. Ambassador Chowdhury, Threl Vantu said, his translator-modulated voice carrying an edge of something between curiosity and disgust. Earth stands charged with 17 violations of the Concord Statutes on Lawful Conflict, arising from the Threshold War against the Asanti Directorate. These charges include the use of weapons designed to cause unnecessary suffering, deceptive practices constituting unlawful perfidy, and conduct calculated to inflict psychological harm beyond military necessity. How does Earth answer? Does Earth? Not guilty on all 17 counts, Chowdhury said. And Your Honor, before we begin, I'd like to note for the record that humanity has read the Concord Statutes on Lawful Conflict in full, all 11,000 pages. We would like the tribunal to know that we agree with most of them. We wrote several sections that are stricter than our own. A murmur went through the gallery. The Asanti delegation, seated across the chamber in high-collared formal dress, did not react. Their lead prosecutor, a severe official named Kest Osadural, rose. Your Honor, the accused's compliance with paperwork is not evidence of compliance with conduct. We ask the court's patience as we walk through exactly what this species did to us. Please, Chowdhury said, walk us through it. What almost no one in that chamber knew, what Earth's own delegation had spent 4 years quietly confirming, was that this trial had been engineered from the very beginning, not by Earth, by someone else entirely. But that would come later. For now, humanity would let the accusations breathe, because Chowdhury understood something the Concord's legal minds had forgotten in 3,000 years of peace. The side that explains itself first often loses, and the side that lets the accusation exhaust itself usually finds the truth waiting underneath. It was worth understanding, for anyone watching the feed of this tribunal across 41 member worlds, exactly what the Concord's legal system actually was. It hadn't been built by any one species. It was assembled piece by piece over 3,000 years, out of the surviving legal traditions of dozens of civilizations that had each, in their own violent histories, eventually asked the same question. Is there a version of conflict that doesn't require the complete destruction of everyone involved? The answer every one of them had arrived at, independently, was yes, but only if certain lines were agreed upon in advance, and only if breaking those lines carried a cost even the winning side would have to pay. That was the entire premise of the Chamber of Adjudication, not that war could be made kind, only that it could be made survivable for the species fighting it and for everyone standing nearby. Earth had joined the Concord only 63 years earlier, later than almost every other member species. Many delegations in that gallery still privately regarded humanity the way an old, tired village regards a new family that just moved in loud and fast, impressive in a way that made everyone slightly uneasy. Humanity had gone from a single unified planetary government to full Concord membership, and from full membership to fighting its first interstellar war in under 2 decades. No other species in the Concord's recorded history had escalated that quickly. It was, by itself, part of why this trial had drawn every camera and delegate the station could hold. Everyone wanted to know what humanity actually was, and a war crimes tribunal, whatever its outcome, was going to tell them. The first charge was read aloud. Count 1. The deployment of weapons designed to cause unnecessary suffering, specifically low-frequency acoustic devices deployed against Asante soldiers during the Battle of Cassandra Ridge. Chowdhury nodded slowly. Your Honor, I'd like to call our first witness, not a soldier, a historian. Dr. Amara Osi had spent 30 years studying the history of psychological warfare on Earth, before humanity had ever left its solar system. She stood now before a tribunal of aliens, about to explain something almost embarrassingly old. Your Honor, the device in question is what our own soldiers nicknamed the Howler. It projects a low modulated frequency that Asante physiology, which relies on subvocal resonance organs for both hearing and balance, finds deeply disorienting. The prosecution calls this a weapon designed for unnecessary suffering. I'd like to explain what it's actually based on. She brought up a projection, an old photograph, grainy, of a wooden device shaped like a spinning cross. This is called a bullroarer. Humans have used it for at least 17,000 years on every inhabited continent of our homeworld for ceremonies, storytelling, and yes, warfare. Its sound is disorienting to certain nervous systems because it operates below the range most human ears consciously register, but which the inner ear still processes as location data. Armies used variants of this principle to create confusion about where an attacking force actually was, long before anyone understood why it worked. Your Honor, Kestos Adural interjected, the age of a tactic's ancestry does not determine whether the modern weapon is lawful. Agreed, Dr. Osei said before Chowdhury could answer. I raised the bullroarer not to excuse the weapon by pointing at its age, but to make a different point. Humans have spent 17,000 years learning, slowly and often at great cost, which uses of disorientation are acceptable and which cross into cruelty. We banned entire categories of weapons over the last 2 centuries alone, specifically because we decided the suffering they caused outweighed any military value. Weapons designed purely to blind permanently. Weapons designed so that a wound, once inflicted, could never fully heal. Devices meant to maim rather than incapacitate. These weren't banned because an enemy complained. They were banned because human militaries, after using them, looked at the results and decided a line had to be drawn somewhere, and this was where they chose to draw it. Your Honor, Chowdhury said, the point Dr. Osei is making is this. Humanity does not treat its own laws of war as recent inventions dictated by this court. We arrived at this tribunal already believing in the distinction it exists to enforce. Dr. Osei, does the Howler cause permanent injury? No. Extensive post-conflict examination of affected Asante personnel, conducted jointly, I should add, by human and Asante medical teams at Earth's request, found 0 cases of lasting physiological harm. Full recovery in all cases occurred within 6 hours of removal from the affected zone. So it disorients, it does not injure. Correct. It is functionally closer to what your own statutes classify as a non-lethal disruption method, under Article 44. This was the crux of something the gallery was only beginning to understand. The Concord's own laws of war, much like humanity's, drew a very old and very important line. The line between weapons designed to incapacitate and weapons designed to cause suffering with no military purpose. It's the same distinction that, on Earth, had led nations to ban blinding laser weapons in 1995 while still permitting flashbangs. The same distinction that banned exploding bullets designed purely to maximize wound trauma, while permitting standard ammunition that caused equivalent lethality without gratuitous cruelty. The principle wasn't about how a weapon felt to encounter. It was about whether the suffering it caused exceeded what was necessary to achieve a legitimate military objective. The Howler achieved disorientation, Chowdhury continued, which is a legitimate military objective under your own statutes, Article 44, subsection 2. It did so without causing injury exceeding that objective. That is not unnecessary suffering under any standard your court has ever applied to any other species. We'd ask the court to note, your own precedent, the Vekmiri case, dealt with a plague designed to starve an entire population over years. We're discussing a sound that gave soldiers a bad afternoon. Kest Osadural tried a different angle. Doctor, isn't it true that human forces specifically studied Osanti physiology before deploying this device? That they knew in advance precisely which frequencies would cause the most severe disorientation to our species specifically? Yes, Dr. Osei said simply. We did. I want the tribunal to sit with that for a moment, because I think the prosecution intends it to sound damning, and I understand why it might land that way. But consider the alternative. If we had deployed a disruption weapon without first studying Osanti physiology, we might easily have built something that caused far greater harm than intended, simply through ignorance of what your species could and couldn't tolerate. The study wasn't done to maximize suffering. It was done to calibrate the weapon precisely enough that it would achieve disorientation and stop there, rather than accidentally causing lasting damage through a miscalculation. Your Honor, on Earth, the same principle governs the design of nearly every so-called less lethal tool our own law enforcement and militaries use domestically.
Justice must be served today.
You calibrate to the target specifically because you're trying to do less harm, not more.
You have been found guilty of high treason.
Justice
Sentence shall be executed immediately.
For a long moment, his mouth analog working slightly. A Corveth tell that the delegation had learned over the trial's first hours meant genuine internal deliberation rather than performance. Noted. Proceed to count 2. Count 2 was read. Unlawful perfidy, relating to a human unit that had broadcast a false surrender signal before a counterattack at the Denralo Strait. Chowdhury did not call a historian this time. She called a lawyer.
Yaga!
Commander Julio Reyes retired, now serving as Earth's senior legal counsel on the laws of armed
treason against the council.
Took the stand wearing his old service uniform,
no amount of rhetoric can erase his crime.
Dress.
Justice demands the
Chowdhury would
ultimate
later
penalty.
admit, a calculated choice.
Undeniable.
Your Honor, I want to draw a distinction that exists in every legal framework for warfare that intelligent species have ever developed, including, I'll note, the Concord's own statutes.
For the peace of all
it's the
our
distinction
worlds.
between a ruse of
May it
war
last forever.
and perfidy. He continued, perfidy is when you invite the enemy's trust under a promise protected by the laws of war, a genuine flag of truce, a genuine surrender, the protected status of medical personnel, and then betray that trust.
The enemy is advancing on all fronts.
That is, and always has been, a war crime.
If we don't act now, there will be nothing left to say.
It was a war crime under Earth's own laws
Prepare
for over a century before we ever met
immediately.
another species. It remains one.
This is
A
our
ruse,
final
on the other
offer.
hand, is deception that does not exploit a protected
Then we have
status.
nothing left to discuss.
Camouflage is a ruse. Decoy positions are a ruse. Feigned retreats
council
designed
will
to
now
lure an
review the
enemy into a
evidence.
trap.
Present
Used by
the
militaries
telemetry
on
logs
Earth
from
for
the
over
outer rim.
2,000 years, including by commanders whose tactics are still studied in officer training today,
We must respect the
are a
treaty.
ruse,
These
provided
people
they
are
don't
innocent
rely
of
on
these
protected
charges.
symbols like
Justice
a genuine
must be
white
served
flag.
today.
The broadcast in question,
The evidence
Kest
is
Osadural
absolute.
said, was received by
You have been
Osanti
found
Command as an
guilty of
unconditional
high
surrender
treason.
signal. It
Sentence
was
shall
received
be
as a
executed
tactical signal
immediately.
mimicking a stand-down pattern, Reyes corrected. Your Honor, you submitted the full signal logs to the court. The broadcast did not use the Concorde's registered protected surrender frequency, the one reserved under Article 12 for genuine capitulation, monitored and enforced across all 41 member species. It used a general tactical channel. The Osanti Command interpreted it as a surrender because they chose to, not because we invoked any protected status.
Yaga.
This point mattered enormously, and Reyes made sure the tribunal understood why. The entire architecture of lawful warfare, on Earth, and apparently across the Concorde as well, depended on certain
The accused
signals
stands
being
charged
sacred
with high
specifically
treason against the
so
council.
that mercy
The evidence
remained
is
possible.
absolute. No amount
If
of rhetoric
genuine
can erase
surrender
his
could be faked
crimes.
without consequence,
Justice
no one
demands
would
the
ever
ultimate
accept a
penalty.
surrender again.
The
and
evidence
wars
is
would simply end in
undeniable.
extermination
We must proceed
because
with
no
caution.
combatant could risk trusting an offer to stop fighting.
My people will never
That was
accept
why
this
perfidy
decree.
involving actual protected symbols carried such severe penalties.
For the peace
And it was
of
also
all
why
our
deception
worlds.
that stayed outside
May it
those
last
protected
forever.
channels remained lawful. Commanders needed room to outthink each other, or war became a straight contest of numbers, with no room for skill, patience, or restraint to matter at all. We'd remind the court, Reyes said, that historically, an entire
The enemy
invasion
is
of Earth's
advancing on
largest
all
occupied
fronts.
continent during our Second
If we
World
don't act
War
now, there will be
succeeded
nothing left to
substantially because of an
Prepare your
elaborate
squads for
deception
deployment
campaign.
immediately.
Fake armies, fake radio traffic,
This is
an
our
entire
final
fictional
offer.
military command structure, built to mislead
we
an
have
enemy
nothing
about
left
where
to
an attack
discuss.
would land. It is remembered by human historians not as a crime,
The Council will now
but as one of
review
the
the
most
evidence.
studied and admired
Present the
achievements
telemetry
in the
logs
history of
from
our
the
military
outer rim.
strategy. Because deception aimed at an enemy's judgment is not the same as
We must
betrayal of
respect
an
the
enemy's
treaty.
trust in
These
protected
people are
symbols.
innocent of these charges.
Every legal system that has
Justice
ever
must be
tried to
served
regulate
today.
warfare, including yours,
The evidence is
has had to draw
absolute.
that same line because without it,
You have been
warfare
found
cannot be
guilty
limited
of
at
high
all.
treason.
The gallery was quiet.
Sentence shall be
Justice
executed immediately.
Threlvantu, for the first time, looked less like a judge delivering procedure and more like someone doing arithmetic he didn't enjoy. Council, he said, you cite this deception campaign as something your species admires. Does humanity draw no distinction at all, then, between honorable and dishonorable victory? It was Reyes who answered, and something in his voice shifted. Less courtroom, more classroom. We draw that distinction constantly, Your Honor, probably more than any species I've studied in the Concord archives. It's why we still argue, generations later, about wars long since concluded. Which tactics were justified, which crossed a line, which commanders we honor, and which we condemn even
The
when they
accused stands
won.
charged with high treason
Humanity
against
has
the Council.
executed its
The
own
evidence
soldiers
is absolute.
for war
No
crimes
amount of
committed
rhetoric
against
can
enemies
erase
who
his
had already
crimes.
lost. We
Justice
have
demands
prosecuted
the
our own
ultimate
leaders,
penalty.
decades after the
evidence
fact,
is
for
undeniable.
conduct that was
We
legal
must
under the
proceed
laws
with
of the
caution.
time, but that later generations judged to have
My
been
people
wrong
will never
regardless.
accept this decree.
What we do not do is confuse deception of judgment with dishonor.
For the
A
peace
commander
of
who
all our
outthinks an
worlds.
opponent using misdirection is
last
admired.
forever.
A commander who exploits an enemy's trust in a protected symbol to slaughter people who believe themselves safe is, in every framework we've built across thousands of years and hundreds of cultures, remembered as something closer to a war criminal than a hero.
The
whether
enemy
or
is
not the law
advancing
of
on
his
all
era
fronts.
happened to catch him for
If
it.
we don't act now, there will be
The
nothing left
Denralo
to
Strait
save.
broadcast was the first
Prepare your
kind.
squads for
Nothing in
deployment
the evidence
immediately.
supports the second. Count 3, Justice
This is our
Threlvantu
final
said
offer.
finally. Count 3 was
Then
by a
we
wide
have
margin
nothing left to
the
discuss.
strangest charge Earth had ever faced in any legal forum, human or alien. The accused,
Council will now
Festos
review the
Aduro read,
evidence.
is charged with
Present the
conduct
telemetry
calculated to
logs from
inflict
the outer
psychological
rim.
harm beyond military necessity. Specifically, the systematic and repeated
We must
release
respect the
of
treaty.
captured Osanti
These people
combatants
are innocent of
without
these
ransom,
charges.
without exchange,
Justice must
and
be
without
served
condition.
today.
In a manner the Directorate
The evidence
alleges was
is
designed
absolute.
to undermine troop morale
You have
and
been found
destabilize
guilty of
command
high
structures.
treason.
There
Sentence
was a
shall be
long
executed
silence.
immediately.
I want to make sure I understand the charge, Justice Threlvantu said slowly. Earth is accused of war crimes for releasing prisoners unharmed, or releasing them strategically, Your Honor, Osadural said, with the strained dignity of a man who knew exactly how this sounded and had to say it anyway. Osanti society operates on a strict honor debt structure. A soldier captured and killed is mourned. A soldier captured and ransomed restores the family's honor through the exchange. A soldier captured and simply released with medical treatment, a letter of safe passage, and no exchange demanded whatsoever, incurs an unpayable debt.
The accused
It
stands
is within
charged
our
with high
culture one of
treason
the
against the
cruelest
Council.
things that can
The
be done
evidence
to a
is
person.
absolute.
It
No
spread
amount of
through our
rhetoric can
ranks.
erase his crimes.
Soldiers began surrendering
Justice
deliberately,
demands the ultimate
knowing
penalty.
they would be returned.
The evidence is
It broke
undeniable.
our chain of command
We
from
must
the
proceed
inside.
with caution.
Chowdhury let that sit for a moment
My
before
people will
responding,
never accept this
because she
decree.
understood this was, in its own way, the most serious charge of the three,
For the
and
peace
also
of
the one
all
that
our
most
worlds.
needed careful handling.
May it last forever.
There was something worth taking seriously here. Not a crime, but a genuine cultural collision that deserved acknowledgement rather than dismissal. Your Honor, humanity did not know when this practice began what unconditional release meant within Osanti honor culture.
The
I
enemy
want to
is
be direct
advancing on
about
all
that.
fronts.
Our forces were
If
following
we
our
don't
own
act
laws
now,
of
there will
armed
be
conflict,
nothing left to save.
which require humane treatment
Prepare your
of
squads
captured
for deployment
combatants
immediately.
and prohibit holding prisoners as leverage beyond what
This
is
is our
necessary
final
for security.
offer.
Once we did learn, approximately
Then we have
14
nothing
months
left
into
to
the
discuss.
conflict, through captured Osanti communications our intelligence services
The
translated,
Council will now
Earth's
review the
command
evidence.
issued new protocols.
Present the
We
telemetry
began
logs
formally
from the outer
structuring
rim.
releases as negotiated exchanges, even when we asked for nothing in return,
We
but a
must
symbolic
respect the
token,
treaty.
specifically
These
so
people
the
are innocent
transaction
of these
fit within
charges.
Osanti honor frameworks
Justice must be
and
served
did not
today.
weaponize a difference we hadn't
The evidence
intended to
is
exploit.
absolute.
Io continued releasing prisoners
have been
after
found
learning
guilty
the
of
effect.
high treason.
Osadural pressed.
Sentence
did,
shall be
Chowdhury
executed
said.
immediately.
Because the alternative, holding or worse harming prisoners of war to avoid a cultural side effect we didn't cause and didn't intend, is itself the actual war crime under every framework either of our civilizations recognizes. Your Honor, humanity has its own difficult history here, and I won't pretend otherwise. For most of our history, treatment of prisoners was tied to notions of ransom, exchange, and honor, not unlike the Osanti system I've just heard described. It took centuries and a great deal of suffering for human civilization to arrive at the principle now written into our oldest surviving law of war, that a person who has stopped fighting is entitled to protection regardless of what it costs
The
the
accused
victor's
stands
pride
charged with high
or the
treason
enemy's
against the
cultural
council.
comfort
The evidence is
to grant
absolute.
it.
No amount of
We were not
rhetoric can
trying to
erase his
destabilize
crimes.
the Osanti directorate
Justice
through
demands
mercy.
the ultimate penalty.
We were following the one rule
evidence
we
is
consider
undeniable.
almost sacred.
We must proceed
That
with
the
caution.
two effects collided is a tragedy of translation,
My
not a
people will
crime
never
of
accept
intent.
this decree.
Kest Osadura was not finished. Ambassador, forgive me, but
For the
we didn't
peace
know
of
and then
all
we
our
adjusted
worlds.
slightly.
May
Is a
it
strange
last
defense for
forever.
a species that prides itself, as your council has said twice today, on thousands of years of careful moral reasoning about warfare. It's not a strange defense, Chowdhury said. It's an honest one. Your Honor, I'd rather stand here and admit that humanity
The enemy
got
is
something wrong
advancing
through
on all
ignorance
fronts.
and fixed it once we
If we
understood.
don't act now, there
than
will be
pretend
nothing
we
left to
arrived
save.
at every answer in advance.
Prepare your squads for
We
deployment
didn't.
immediately.
Our own history includes a long, uncomfortable journey
This is
on
our
exactly
final
this
offer.
question. The treatment of captured combatants.
Then we have
For
nothing
most of
left
it,
to discuss.
human prisoners of war were property, sold, enslaved, executed,
council will
or
now
held for
review the
ransom,
evidence.
depending on the era and the culture.
Present the telemetry
sometimes all
logs
within the
from the
same
outer
century
rim.
on the same continent. The idea that a prisoner is owed protection simply because
We
they
must
can no
respect
longer
the
fight,
treaty.
regardless
These
of what
people
their
are
captors
innocent
could
of these
gain
charges.
otherwise, is one of the
Justice
newest
must be
ideas in
served
the
today.
whole of human legal history.
The
Barely
evidence is
150 years
absolute.
old by the time we left our solar
You have
system.
been found guilty of
We are
high
not a species
treason.
that got this right from the beginning.
Sentence shall be
and is
executed
lecturing
immediately.
the Osanti Directorate from a position of inherited wisdom. We are a species that got it badly wrong for most of our history, suffered enormously for it, wrote the rule down specifically so we would never talk ourselves out of it again, and then discovered in this war that following that rule collided with a culture whose honor system worked in the opposite direction. That collision is real. It is also not a war crime. It's the kind of accident that happens when two civilizations who each fought hard to arrive at their own version of decency meet each other for the first time under fire, instead of in peace, where there would have been time to ask questions before anyone got hurt. Justice Threlvantu was quiet for a long moment.
The accused stands
This
charged
tribunal
with
will
high
note,
treason
he said
against the
eventually,
council. The
that
evidence is
prosecution
absolute.
has, for the
No
first
amount
time
of rhetoric
today,
can erase his
described
crimes.
a genuine and serious
Justice
harm.
demands the ultimate
It
penalty.
will also note that intent
evidence is
a required
undeniable.
element of every
must
charge
proceed
before
with
this court,
caution.
and the evidence submitted suggests the
people
harm was
will
neither
never accept
intended
this
nor
decree.
sustained after Earth became aware of it. Count 3 will be weighed
For the
accordingly.
peace of
It
all
was
our
the closest
worlds.
thing to sympathy the
May it
Osanti had
last
received
forever.
all day. Chowdhury did not smile. She understood this was not a game to be won cleanly. It was a war, and people, human and Osanti both, had died in it. But she also understood that something about this trial still didn't add up.
The enemy is
and it
advancing
was
on
time
all
to say
fronts.
so. Your Honor,
If we don't
she
act
said,
now, there will
may
be
I
nothing
address
left
the
to save.
tribunal on the origin of this
Prepare
war?
your squads for deployment
Your Honor,
immediately.
Chowdhury said, opening the black case for the first
This
time.
is our final offer.
Earth has answered 14 more counts in written brief,
Then we have
submitted to this
nothing
court
left
in
to
advance,
discuss.
and we're happy to walk through any of them the tribunal wishes. But I'd like
The
to use our
council will
remaining
now
time
review
on
the
something the
evidence.
prosecution has not addressed
Present the
once
telemetry
today.
logs
How
from the
this
outer
war
rim.
began. Kest Osadural stiffened almost imperceptibly. The origin of
We
the
must
conflict is
respect
not
the
before
treaty.
this tribunal.
These people are
This is
innocent
a war
of these
crimes
charges.
tribunal, not a war
Justice
guilt
must be
tribunal.
served today.
Normally, I'd agree completely.
The evidence is
Chowdhury
absolute.
said. Except that 3
You
of the
have been
17
found guilty
charges
of
against
high
Earth
treason.
allege conduct that was disproportionate
Sentence shall
to
be
military
executed
necessity.
immediately.
And you cannot assess proportionality without knowing what the necessity actually was. So, Your Honor, with his permission, Threlvantu, visibly curious despite himself, gestured for her to continue. From the case, Chowdhury produced not a weapon, not a dramatic prop, but a data crystal, which she handed to the court's evidentiary officer. 8 months before the Threshold War began, a series of raids struck 3 independent mining colonies in neutral space, colonies belonging to neither Earth nor the Osanti Directorate. The raids were brutal and were, at the time, attributed to unaffiliated pirates, Earth's intelligence services, and separately, we have since
The
learned,
accused stands
Osanti
charged with high
intelligence
treason against the
services,
Council.
both
The evidence is
investigated.
absolute. No amount
Both
of rhetoric can
independently
erase his
found
crimes.
forensic signatures,
Justice demands the
vessel drive
ultimate penalty.
harmonics, weapon
The evidence
discharge
is
patterns,
undeniable.
even
We must
communication
proceed with
cipher
caution.
structures, consistent with a third power
My people
neither of
will
our
never
governments
accept
had
this
reason
decree.
to suspect at the time. The Carsoon Combine. A ripple went
For
through
the
the
peace
gallery.
of all our worlds.
The Carsoon Combine
May
held
it
no
last
seat in this
forever.
chamber. They had in fact formally withdrawn from Concord membership 11 years prior, citing philosophical incompatibility with the Concord's conflict resolution framework. A framework the Carsoon had reportedly found too restrictive.
The enemy
of their
is advancing on
expansionist
all
ambitions.
fronts.
The Carsoon
If we don't
Combine's
act now,
strategic
there will be
doctrine,
nothing left to say.
which we've cross-referenced with
Prepare
3
your squads
independent
for deployment
intelligence services,
immediately.
including discreetly the
This is our
Directorate's
final
own,
offer.
Chowdhury continued, relies on
Then we
provoking
have
wars
nothing left to
between rival
discuss.
powers, then absorbing whichever side survives weakened.
The Council
The
will now
raids on those
review the
mining
evidence.
colonies weren't random
Present
piracy.
the telemetry
They
logs
were
from the
staged
outer
to
rim.
look like a human provocation against Asanti interests, using stolen
We must
human
respect the
manufacture
treaty.
equipment
These
specifically
people are
obtained
innocent of
to
these
plant a
charges.
false trail. The
Justice must
Directorate
be served
believed in
today.
good faith that Earth had struck first.
The evidence is
Earth, for
absolute.
its part, spent the opening months
You
of
have
this
been found
war
guilty of
believing
high
the
treason.
Asanti Directorate had struck
Sentence
first,
shall be executed
based
immediately.
on a parallel deception aimed at us. We were both correct that an attack had occurred, and we were both wrong about who committed it. This is an extraordinary claim, Threlvantu said. It is, Your Honor, which is why we didn't lead with it. We spent 3 years building the case, rather than making the accusation. Everything on that crystal has been independently verified by a joint Earth-Osanti forensic panel over the past 11 months. A panel the Directorate's own current government requested, once early signs of the deception surfaced on their side as well. Ambassador Ossa Dural's government has had access to a preliminary version of these findings for 6 weeks. Every
The
eye in the
accused
chamber
stands
turned
charged
to
with
Kest
high
Ossa
treason
Dural,
against the Council.
who, for the first
evidence
time
is
in the entire
absolute.
proceeding,
No amount of
did
rhetoric
not
can erase his
immediately respond.
crimes. Justice
The
demands
Directorate,
the ultimate
he said
penalty.
finally carefully,
The evidence is
has been
undeniable.
independently
We must proceed
investigating
with
the
caution.
same anomalies. We are not yet
My
prepared to
people
formally
will never
concur with the
accept this
human
decree.
delegation's conclusions. Understood, Chowdhury said. Your
the
Honor, I'd
peace
like
of
to enter
all our
one further
worlds.
piece of evidence before
May
I
it
close.
last forever.
Not to embarrass the prosecution, but because I think it matters to how this tribunal weighs everything else it's heard today. 11 months ago, before either government was prepared to say any of this publicly, a joint human Osanti forensic
The
team,
enemy is advancing
6
on all
investigators,
fronts.
3 from each side,
we don't act now,
working
there
out
will
of
be
a
nothing
neutral
left to
research
save.
station with no press
Prepare your
access,
squads for deployment
spent
immediately.
140 days independently re-examining
This is
the
our
sensor
final
logs
offer.
from the very first battle of this war.
Then we have
Both
nothing left to
delegations agreed
discuss.
in advance that either side could walk away from the findings if they
The
disagreed
Council will
with the
now review
methodology.
the evidence.
Neither side
Present
did.
the
I
telemetry
mention this
logs
because
from
it
the
means the
outer
account
rim.
I've given this court today isn't Earth's story about the war.
We
It's a
must
story
respect the treaty.
two exhausted,
These people are
grieving
innocent
governments
of these
arrived
charges.
at together, working
Justice
side
must
by
be
side,
served today.
because both of them wanted the truth more than
evidence
they
is
wanted to
absolute.
keep believing in a version
You
of
have been
events
found guilty
that let
of
them
high
stay
treason.
angry at each other.
Sentence shall be
For the first
executed
time since
immediately.
the tribunal had opened, the gallery was completely silent. Not the tense silence before, waiting for a verdict, but something quieter, the kind of silence that happens when a room full of strangers all simultaneously understand that they've been watching something larger than the trial they thought they'd come to see. You don't have to concur today, Chowdhury said, not unkindly. The evidence will speak regardless of when either of us is ready for it to. Your Honor, humanity did not come here today to escape accountability. Every action detailed in these 17 counts happened, and we've answered each one on its own terms under your own laws, honestly. Because that's what we believe a lawful power owes any court it appears before.
The accused
friendly
stands
or
charged with
hostile.
high treason against
But
the
the
Council.
framing of this
The evidence
entire
is
war,
absolute. No amount of
the idea
rhetoric
that Earth
can erase
and the
his
Asanti
crimes.
Directorate were ever truly
Justice
enemies
demands the
was
ultimate
manufactured
penalty.
by a third
The
party
evidence
who
is
is not in this
undeniable.
room,
We
has
must
no
proceed
seat
with
in this
caution.
chamber, and has spent the length of this trial
My people
hoping
will
neither
never
side
accept this
compares
decree.
notes.
For the peace of all our worlds.
May it last forever.
The Chamber of Adjudication reconvened 4 days later. 4 days in Concord judicial tradition was almost unheard of for a case of this scale. Cases of
The
lesser
enemy is
complexity
advancing
had
on all
taken
fronts.
decades. But once
If we
the
don't
joint
act now,
forensic
there will be
panel's
nothing
full
left to
report
say.
was formally entered,
Prepare your
and once
squads for
Osanti
deployment
and human
immediately.
investigators found themselves, for the first time
This
in
is
the
our
war's history,
final offer.
working from the exact same set of facts,
Then we have
there had
nothing
been
left to
remarkably
discuss.
little left to argue about. Justice Threl Vantu read the findings himself,
The council
without
will now
delegation,
review the evidence.
which the gallery understood to
Present
be
the
its own
telemetry
kind of
logs
statement.
from the outer rim.
On counts 1 and 2, he said, this tribunal finds the accused not guilty.
We must
The
respect
conduct
treaty.
described falls
These
within
people are
recognized
innocent
lawful
of these
practices of
charges.
disruption and ruse,
Justice must be
consistent
served
with,
today.
and in several respects,
The
more
evidence
restrained
is
than
absolute.
this Concord's own statutes
You have
on
been
lawful
found
conflict.
guilty of high
On
treason.
count 3, this tribunal
Sentence
finds that
shall be
harm
executed
occurred,
immediately.
but that the required element of intent has not been established, and further finds that the accused took corrective action upon becoming aware of the harm, in good faith and without prompting from this court. No finding of guilt is entered. On the remaining 14 counts addressed in written brief, this tribunal has reviewed Earth's submissions in full and finds insufficient evidence to sustain any charge to the standard required by this court. He paused and set down the record for a
Yaga.
moment. A very human gesture, Chowdhury thought, for someone whose species had never fought a war. This tribunal further notes, though it exceeds our original mandate, that the joint forensic findings regarding the
accused stands
Combine's
charged with
role
high treason
in
against the
instigating
council.
threshold
The evidence
war
is absolute.
will be
No amount of
formally
rhetoric
referred
can
to
erase his
Concord
crimes.
Security Council
Justice
for
demands the
independent
ultimate
action.
penalty.
This
The
tribunal
evidence
was
is
convened to
undeniable.
determine whether
We must
Earth
proceed
committed
with
war
caution.
crimes. It did not. It was,
My
alongside
people
the
will never
Osanti
accept this
Directorate,
decree.
the target of an act of manufactured conflict,
For the peace
engineered
of
by
all
a
our
power
worlds.
that calculated
May it
correctly
last
for a
forever.
while, that neither side would look past the war in front of them long enough to ask who benefited from it existing at all. Kest Osadural rose. It was not required of him procedurally, but he did it anyway. The Directorate wishes to formally withdraw all charges,
The enemy is
he said,
advancing on all
and
fronts.
to state for the record,
If we don't
something
act
that
now,
will
there
not
will be
appear
nothing
in
left
any
to save.
legal finding.
Prepare your
because it
squads
isn't
for
a legal
deployment
matter.
immediately.
We came to this tribunal believing we had
This
been
is our
wronged by an
final
enemy.
offer.
We are leaving it having learned we spent a war
Then
fighting
we
the
have
wrong
nothing left to discuss.
while the actual architects of our suffering watched from outside this chamber,
The
confident
council
we'd
will
never
now
think to
review
look.
the evidence.
That is not a comfortable
Present the
thing to say
telemetry
aloud.
logs from the
It
outer
needs
rim.
saying anyway. Chowdhury closed her case, the same black case now empty of everything
must
except a
respect the
single
treaty.
data crystal
These
she'd
people
leave
are
with the
innocent
court
of these
archive.
charges.
Outside the
Justice
chamber,
must be served
one of her
today.
aides asked her quietly whether she'd
evidence is
expected the Osanti
absolute.
to concede so gracefully.
You have been
I
found
expected
guilty
them
of
to
high
do what any
treason.
honest party does
Sentence
once the
shall be
evidence
executed
outweighs the story
immediately.
they've been telling themselves, she said. Most species get there eventually. It just usually takes longer than 4 days. The aide, a young analyst on her first off-world posting, hesitated before asking the question everyone in the delegation had been quietly circling for months. Ambassador, why did we spend 4 years building this case instead of presenting the Karsoon evidence the moment we found it? We could have ended the war a lot sooner. Chowdhury thought
Yaga.
about how to answer that, honestly. Because if we'd walked into an active war and announced a third party framed us, with the Osanti still burying their dead and still convinced we'd killed them, nobody would have believed a word of it.
The
It
accused
would have
stands
looked
charged
exactly
with
like
high
what a
treason
losing
against the
side
council.
says when it's
The
desperate.
evidence is absolute.
Evidence
No
only
amount
works
of
when the
rhetoric can
people
erase
hearing
his
it
crimes.
are ready to hear it.
Justice
We
demands
had
the
to
ultimate
survive the
penalty.
accusation on its own
The
terms
evidence
first.
is undeniable.
Answer every count
must proceed
honestly.
with caution.
Take responsibility for what was actually ours to
My
take
people will
responsibility
never
for.
accept this decree.
Before anyone in that chamber would trust us enough to consider that the whole war
the peace
might have
of
been
all our
someone else's
worlds.
design.
May it
That's not a
last
legal
forever.
strategy. It's just how trust actually gets rebuilt between people who've been trying to kill each other. You earn the right to be believed before you get to be right. Behind them in the chamber, the Concord's clerks began drafting the referral to the Security Council.
The enemy
The
is
first
advancing
formal
on all
action
fronts.
against the Karsoon Combine in
If we don't
11
act
years.
now, there will be nothing left to say.
Historians would later mark this
Prepare
trial
your squads for
as the
deployment
moment the
immediately.
Concord's newest member species stopped being treated
This is
as a
our final
curiosity,
offer.
to be studied from a safe distance.
Then we
and
have
started
nothing
being
left to
treated as a
discuss.
power whose account of events carried the same weight.